Okay, AB. So I want to start by asking, what inspired you to create this story? Did it stem from your own personal experience in college?
Yeah, 100%. It's funny, people ask me this question, and I'm always like, yeah, like, of course it's them, my personal experience. And thank you for asking. School and college especially was a nightmare for me.
Mm,
And I think that, the CRAM really began as this desire to exercise my academic demons. And as we brought more and more people onto the project, I learned that, everyone, good students, bad students alike, we all have the same nightmares about school. These are nightmares I'm sure you've had, Riley.
oh my God, yes.
Yeah.
It's awful.
It's very bad. My grandmother, who just turned 93, she tells me that she like never dreams about work, but she still has dreams about school. And I
Ooh,
think CRAM really then became this desire to like interrogate, why is the universal experience of school in this country, at least, fear? Why are we all so afraid?
yeah, that's really interesting. Sucks that I can never get away from that if your 93-year-old
I know.
grandmother's still having those dreams. So, yikes.
Yeah. Well, my hope is CRAM can maybe be, the key to that door for people just as a way to talk about it. One of the beautiful things with the movie is people have watched it and come up to us and said, that they felt seen. I think the crazy thing about these fears is that we all carry them kind of alone, and the idea that school is scary, or the feeling of not, of fearing that you won't succeed, or whatever it is, these are fears that isolate us, and in reality they're fears that everyone is experiencing. And so CRAM's not a message movie or anything, but my hope is that people can talk about some of this stuff, and that the movie can be a primer for that conversation.
The library, so dark, creepy, mysterious, like the perfect setting for a horror film. How did you come across this location and what was it like shooting in that kind of atmosphere?
Oh my God. Thank you. Yeah. It's so funny. At every screening, people will come up to me like guessing what the library was, and they're almost
Yeah.
always wrong. But everyone thinks that it's their library. Everyone's like, is it the
Oh
library
my
at this
gosh.
school? And I think that's so cool because it really speaks to this sort of universality of that experience. Everyone has been in the library late at night, and everyone has had a moment where they hear a noise in the stacks or look over their shoulder and feel something.
Mm.
I'm sure you have, like everybody has. And so I'm not going to tell you the library because I actually am really attracted to the sort of anonymity of that experience. I like people's ability
Oh,
to project onto it in that way. But I will say that shooting in the space was amazing. It was terrifying. And, a tremendous credit goes out there to our cinematographer, who's my
mm.
co-producer as well, Felix Hanta, who I think did such a great job, not sort of layering stuff on top of the space, but rather just responding to the space as it already existed. The space has this very creepy atmosphere. Anyone in there would just tell you it's scary. And so our job was really to sort of listen rather than say something of our own. Just, there are all these like busts of old men all over the place.
Yeah.
And it's horrifying. You look into a corner and there's like a scary face. So it's just about paying attention to your surroundings. And it's an amazing space, and I feel really lucky.
There's this really amazing shot that you guys did. Well, you did a ton of them, but one
Thank
in
you.
particular, and it kicks off like the horror part of the film. It's when Mark's working on his laptop and the camera trucks forward and goes up above his head and then flips over, lands
Yeah.
smoothly behind him. How did you and your cinematographer Felix pull that off?
Yeah, wonderful question. I actually just last week on Twitter like posted a whole breakdown of that shot in particular. Excuse
Oh,
me.
cool.
So people can check that out. But we're an indie film. We don't have a large budget. So if you want to do a camera move that dynamic, you're gonna have to get creative. A Hollywood production might rent like something like a techno crane. We had to build a custom rig. Felix is also an engineer, and he designed a rig we call the Flipatron 2000, which was basically like
Okay.
a medieval siege weapon, a trebuchet, counterweighted, made of lumber. And he designed it with tremendous precision to execute exactly that move. And it's amazing because like you said, it's the camera move that sort of marks the transition in the story, from a sort of conventional kind of human level experience into the sort of dreamscape of the horror of the nightmare. And I think that we knew that we would never be able to flip the camera with like the sort of perfect stability that you could do with high end gear. And I mean, to not beat around the bush, the Flipatron, as we called it, wobbled a lot. And one of the amazing things was, rather than trying to run away from that and post stabilize the shot to hell and just have ruin the composition, we had kind of everyone on our team, especially in post, really engage with what was happening. So rather than saying, how can we hide this wobble, our composer who wrote the incredible score, Daniel Rudin, and our sound designer, Daniela Hart, they both kind of accentuated that wobble. They made it a sort of halting, ominous thing. And so it all feels really intentional. And I think it's just an amazing example of how on an indie film, you really have to lean in to your constraints rather than try to fight them. And you can get cool results.
You got really creative with it. That's incredible.
Thank you. Thank you.
And you had an engineer. Lucky you. My gosh.
Yeah. Oh my God. Anyone. Yeah. I think that the nerdier your cinematographer, the better. Felix and I, we met in high school actually. And so we've been kind of on this train together for a while. And the one benefit to your cinematographer being a co-producer is, you can go to him and say, I want to execute this crazy shot, and it's only one shot. And any other producer would say, no, we can't spend, whatever percent of our budget on one shot. But the cinematographer will be like, sounds awesome.
So the first big setting change is when Mark enters into that white hallway that's flooded with the fluorescent lighting. Super uncomfortable. I could not help but feel like this was somewhat inspired by the back rooms. Am I onto something there? Or is that just a happy accident?
I would say that specific reference is a happy accident, but I do think that that moment does mark another transition in the movie. And something we're doing with the camera throughout in that part of the movie is I really wanted the camera to feel that it had a sort of living perspective, one arguably shared by the movie's antagonist who you meet late in the movie, but the feeling that the camera is not only watching Mark, but sort of guiding Mark. And in that moment, I think the camera pans, leading Mark, and then he follows. And so I think that feeling of sort of like haunting, there's a possessed quality to both Mark and the camera, and I think maybe that speaks to that. But what is it specifically that evoked that for you? I'm curious.
Because I've just seen a lot of backrooms content, and it's always so unnerving to me. That in particular, it just felt like a scene out of it where it's just like, this place, it doesn't really exist, but we've all seen it before, and it's just like super unwelcoming. So that's kind of what I picked up.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
I'm definitely always eager to like find spaces, and the library was really fruitful in this way. Spaces that just feel familiar and hostile. I think we've all been in a grossly lit hallway,
Mm-hmm.
And if you can evoke that experience for the audience, and I'll shout out our colorist, Zach Chalmers, I think did such a good job of like, I would say words like sickly, and he would just know the color that would be,
That's good.
It's amazing to work with people like that. Yeah.
I actually have another question on inspiration.
Sure.
So the scene with the machine spewing out all the scantrons and stuff, that gave us the super unnerving old naked man who just appears suddenly in the darkness. Were there any movies in particular that influenced you in the making of that scene?
Yeah, I love that scene. And part of why I love that scene is because the scenes I love most are often the ones where I don't really know where they came from. When I was writing them, I just sort of allow myself, something David Lynch says is room to dream. And I'm really interested in finding that space in my process. And so I remember I was like in a food court in Philly because my partner was in nursing school at the time. And I was writing that scene, and I just was like, I want this to be really scary. And so I just stopped thinking and started tapping into somewhere in my subconscious, I guess. And that's where that scene came out of, which was wonderful. And I think that in that way, David Lynch is a tremendous inspiration. I think he's able to access the depths of his psyche in a way that feels very organic rather than sort of contrived. And I'm always trying to achieve that. It's less about kind of referring to specific movies, although of course we do that all the time, but it's a little more about referring to, whatever helps your process. I think I'm really just trying to make it feel like play where anything can happen. And usually that's where the best stuff comes. And so in that scene, I just sort of gave myself permission to not really know what it means at first. That's, I think, the biggest thing is like, now I know what that scene means. But when I was coming up with it, I just let the images come first. And I will say that that feeling of appearing and disappearing, again, I talked about Lynch, and then obviously, I think like A Nightmare on Elm Street is a huge touchstone, and the way that movie evokes the language of dreams, where you'll see a door and you'll go through the door and you'll realize that there's no way that the space you're in is connected to the space you came from, and yet you just buy it in the way that you do a dream. I'm very attracted to that feeling, and I think that there's something about, as long as your actors, and shout out to John Domino who plays Mark, can convey the emotional reality of what they're experiencing, then you can kind of do anything. And it's, the audience has an anchor there, which is the actor.
It's so funny. I think people always like, including me, always assume that these sorts of things in movies were planned so like meticulously from the very beginning, when in reality it just can be a natural process like that. That's really cool.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
And look, like we do plan, you have to plan so meticulously, especially when you don't have that much money, because you can have 10 amazing shots that you're planning for the day and you'll only have time to get 2 of them. And so you need to be able to know what you need. But I will say the copy room scene was an example of like, it was the end of our day and we had not enough time to shoot it. And, I just grabbed the camera and put it on my shoulder, and Felix did the same. And I was just like directing as we were shooting, really trying to, that scene has a very chaotic feeling, which I think reflects the way it was shot in some ways. But in actuality, it was a wonderful creative process on set because we were so fluid. And Joel, who plays the old man, was very game for whatever we threw at him. And it was a very surreal experience.
Yeah. And Joel, who plays that old man, he's already super creepy, but then he just gets like, he gets way more disturbing because all of a sudden, he picks up the quill and he just starts stabbing out his eyes. So then, later on we see the baby bird that comes out of Mark's nose, and that oil covered man, he has feathers on his body. We see a quill on the floor. Is there something that the quill is supposed to represent?
Totally. Yeah. I think throughout the movie, I was really interested in evoking like the textures of academia. There are pencils and Scantron forms and exam books and quills and just these tokens of our academic life. And I think what they mean specifically in the context of CRAM, what that quill means in that moment, I'll leave it to the audience to sort of take, for themselves. I will say that scene is really about Mark finally confronting something within himself that he's been avoiding for a long time. And I think that experience is somewhat cathartic. And in some sense, perhaps there's the ability to then finally see an implement that gives him hopefully the power to do the thing he's trying to do. Although perhaps at a cost, given that it's covered in goopy.
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. Always at a cost. And of course, that's what the movie's really about, is just what is the cost of success in our society. So I think, when I was in school, I spent so much time fiddling with a pencil, and it evokes so many memories for me to even pick one up. As far as the Scantrons are concerned, I remember being really particular that the Scantrons we got were exactly the same ones that I used growing up, because I just wanted it to feel really personal in that way. So, I'm very interested to hear what other people make of some of those symbols. There is, of course, always a meaning, but that meaning, I think, is always going to be filtered through the experience of the audience.
Okay. Yeah. I like that.
Sorry if that's annoying. I'm like, I don't
know.
That's
not annoying. Well, it's annoying when they're like, well, it's up to everyone, like whatever they think. But you're like, here's what I meant. And then you can also think some things. Totally. I'm okay with that. That was good.
Right on. Thank you.
So the Son of Man painting, huge part of the movie. It's mentioned, shown, and like the apples from the painting find their way into a lot of scenes. So can you talk about the deeper meanings of the Son of Man and the context of this story?
Totally. That's a symbol I'm happy to talk about, I think, in part because it's not mine. I'm sort of cribbing it. But I do think that, the apple is always been a symbol for knowledge, of course. But I think what makes that painting so powerful and effective to me is that I find it very scary. Do you find that painting scary? I'm curious.
I have a problem with bowler hats. So little, yeah.
Cool. That's very reasonable. I think
they're creepy.
They are creepy, and that dude is really creepy. And I think that painting really evokes the feeling of like something is a lot scarier when it's obscured. If you hide something as mundane as like a dude in a bowler hat space, suddenly it takes on this sort of ominous quality. And I think that to me, that really felt a lot like what academia has always felt like to me, which is, if you actually dig into it, it's a complex and troubling institution, but it's only really scary. And that fear of school that we all have is only there because we can't see the mechanisms. We can't see the gears being turned under the surface. There is an apple, the apple of knowledge that we are being offered. There's an apple in front of the face that is, taking our money, the sort of vampiric quality of school that this movie is meant to evoke. I think that painting just kind of really gets at what I feel school actually looks like. This sort of apple of knowledge hiding the face of someone perhaps quite ominous.
That's interesting. Yeah, I had done a lot of research on Rene Magritte because I was like, what's this guy about?
Yeah.
All of his paintings are, a person with their face covered. Really creepy stuff.
Really creepy. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you used it. It worked really well
Oh,
in your
thanks so much. I
movie.
appreciate that.
Yeah. And I would love to learn more about the character Libra.
Sure.
So she like attempts to seduce Mark, it seems like during her scene, and she's also the cause of the handprints on his back and his unknowing consumption of the weed cookies. And then of course, like she's revealed to have vampire teeth. And that's commonly a seductive creature. So what is it that she represents?
Totally. Also, Riley, I love how like many specific details you're kind of peppering into your
Really?
questions. I really appreciate. Yeah, totally.
Oh, good.
I really appreciate it. It's great. Libra's awesome because Jane Bradley is an incredible actor, is the biggest thing. She's the only person we cast like straight off of her self-tape. I remember watching her tape
Wow.
and I was just like, boom, that's her. Call her up. Let's lock her in.
Yeah.
And she, it's not only, what she does, which is incredible. It's also what she brings out of John, who plays Mark. I think together their scene is just really electric. And great acting is reacting and giving and receiving, and the two of them had an incredible chemistry. As far as the character is concerned, I was just talking about the apple, and I think there's something compelling about the idea of forbidden knowledge. I've always been interested in the ways that school asks us to learn, but asks us to learn specific things and tells us that certain types of knowledge are forbidden. One of the big, I think, examples of that, of course, is sex. Sex is this thing, especially in college, that is everywhere. It's, I think, not so subtly a very important part of the college experience.
Yes.
And yet it's something that the institution sort of, puts a mask over, hides away in the dark, and says, like, this isn't actually a part of our institution. And I think as a result, you end up with very complex and troubling power dynamics and situations. And so I was interested in exploring the ways in which, I was exploring how to personify that feeling of forbidden knowledge, this sense of like, well, what are the consequences when you make something like sex, an area of knowledge that people can't safely explore? Mm-hmm. If it's dangerous, what does that look like? And the CRAM already is exploring the idea of school as a vampire. And for what it's worth, I do not think that's like a leap at all. If you think about the education system in America,
definitely not.
Not at all. Like, I don't even need to explain it, but like, we give all of our money to these schools, like willingly, for the promise of, I don't know, everlasting life, of like a good life.
Right.
And that is definitely a deal with the devil we're all making. And usually it's a false one. And so this movie is just taking, I think, these ideas that already exist and just the power of horror film, taking metaphor and turning it literal. So Libra is an expression of, the feeling of, like I said, forbidden knowledge and the sort of vampirism of academia as a seductive force.
Okay. Yeah, that is so interesting.
Does that make any sense at all?
No, that makes a lot of sense. Because I was trying to think about that for a while. I was like, okay, what does this mean? What I originally thought was, could it be that she's representing the seductive nature of being a burnout, since that's what Mark is?
Sure, yeah.
But so I could kind of see it both ways. Your way is a lot more, I'm diving into it, I'm actually really understanding it. Sure. Mine was kind of looking more at the surface, I guess.
No, I think it's really, I don't think that's true. I think you're onto something, because I think it's always interesting to me. And one of the things that goes on in this movie is that no one in the institution is actually helping Mark get better. They're just saying, Mark, do this and we'll guide you towards the path that you're supposed to walk, whether or not you want to willingly. And so I think that the degree to which Libra is facilitating his self-destruction, but directing it towards the institution, I think is really astute. That's a great observation.
Oh, thank you. Okay, so one of my favorite scenes, can't wait to talk about this. I love the scene with the old TV, the black and white film. So cool. So after the dog fetches the oil for the man and then the gears begin to turn, the man asks about the purpose of the machine. Mm-hmm. And in response, the dog barks and the captions are like, "It's simple, master. Haven't you realized the gear is turned and I am fed?" Is this a metaphor for the purpose of life, meaning that our soul is fed when our brain is used?
Oh, that's a very optimistic perspective. I like that.
Maybe I'm just optimistic.
Yeah, maybe. I think that's very legitimate. And I think that, the master of the books would agree with you that is what that movie is about.
Okay.
I think I probably take a more cynical approach myself. I think that um the idea of this machinist kind of cranking this gear, by the way, played to great effect by Rolando Chusan, who's been a friend of mine for a while.
Great.
It was so fun. One of my favorite days on CRAM was like when we got to make this old movie, which was so fun. And a lot of people have asked us like, what movie from the 30s is that? And I'm like, it isn't. It's from 2021. Um, but I think that that feeling of kind of cranking away at a gear and not even knowing what it does, that's the grind, literally.
Mm,
I think there's just the very simple metaphor of like the grind that we're all doing all the time. And what does it actually do? And the answer is, well, it's feeding someone, usually someone that isn't us.
yeah.
And the idea of the dog, who we sort of think of as subservient to ourselves, but is actually in some ways our master because we're grinding away every day to feed the dog. Maybe it's just me reflecting on the fact that my cat lives rent free. I don't know. It could be something as simple
Yeah,
as
a little
that.
bit.
Yeah.
No, that is so interesting. I really like that interpretation. It's kind
Thanks.
of more sad than mine,
I know,
but
I
I
know. I
really
mean,
like
now I'm
yours.
like, oh shit, I should take the optimistic perspective sometimes.
No, no, it's whatever you want it to be. It could be
Exactly,
either one,
exactly.
depending on what mood you're in, you know?
Exactly.
So with that scene, the oil-covered man writhing on the floor, absolutely horrific, really scary stuff.
Yeah,
I have two questions on this.
sure.
So, is this how Mark sees himself since he says, I hate looking at you? Also, on inspiration, I drew a visual link to the ending of the movie Men. I don't know if you
Mm.
saw that. And was that like something that came to your mind when you were making this scene?
Awesome. So I do love Alex Garland. We made CRAM
Mhm.
before Men came out, so no.
Oh, that's true. Yeah.
Yeah, but
Shoot.
but I do think
They
there's
they were
something
inspired by you.
that's hell yeah, exactly. That's it.
Mhm.
I do think there's something to the fact that we all kind of, not all, but some of us tend to view our inner selves as like disgusting oil covered freaks. But I do think that, Mark certainly sees a part of himself that way. I think that a lot of people, myself included, in at times, you have a dark corner of your mind where you put the things that you don't want to deal with, the parts of yourself you don't want to confront. And I think that, in my experience, my life has only improved when I have the courage to look at the parts of myself that I'm afraid of.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And that's what I think Mark is experiencing in that scene is just, he has been so afraid of himself. And finally, it's just too much. And he has to pull it out and look at it. And of course, what he sees is repulsive to him.
Mm.
But I think ultimately, I do think, that to me is like one of the most optimistic scenes in the movie, as horrifying as it is, because I do
Yeah.
think that Mark is finally looking at something that he really needs to see.
Mhm. No, that's good. Yeah, it's a lot of people do that. It's easiest to not look at the things that you have to work on for yourself. And like,
Totally.
although it's hard to look at yourself like that and work on it, it's way better for you, you know?
Yeah. I was like a
Yeah.
burnout for a while. I flunked out of college my first time around, and eventually I came back and
Oh,
became a good student. But I think part of that experience was just driven by, like you say, like how hard it is to just accept the idea of myself as a failure. No
yeah.
one wants to say that about themselves, but
Yeah.
until you do, you can't change.
Yeah. That's great that you went back to college though.
Thanks.
Did it all.
Yeah.
That's really cool. Where'd you go?
Originally I went to Emerson College and that didn't go very
Okay.
well. So let's go
Uh,
Massachusetts. Yeah,
whatever.
exactly. Whatever, indeed. And then I went back to public school. I went to Hunter College in New York, which is
Okay,
where I'm
cool.
from, and big fan of public college, mostly because I think the idea of student debt is a crime and, very bad.
Absolutely. Yikes. Yeah. Um, with okay, my favorite character,
Sure.
Master of the Books.
Hell yeah.
I have a feeling that's like everyone's favorite character, to be honest, because he's really fun and really interesting. Tell me more about who he is, what he represents, and also how you designed him, because I saw some really cool details like on his
Yeah.
body.
Absolutely. I think that character was like the most complex collaboration on the movie. It involved
Right.
pretty much every department. Um, and it's a real testament to the fact that, even though it's just you and me talking, movies are not made by one person. A whole group of people makes a movie. And The Master of the Books is a perfect example of that. As far as the inspiration for the character, we've been talking about, school as a vampire. And I think that when you're making a movie about how monstrous school is, that movie needs a monster. School needs to be a monster. And so we knew very early on when we were developing the story that CRAM would have a monster in it. And as we kind of explored the nature of that monstrosity, I was drawn to A couple things. I was drawn to the feeling of, vampirism, but also the sort of lordly, like papal quality he has, the sort of hoarder of knowledge, almost like a dragon sitting on his pile of gold. Um,
Mm.
and I was attracted to the idea of that, in our systems, no one is really king. No one really, rules. Everyone serves some other master, some darker lord, and I
Yeah.
think that the master of the books, as both this sort of tyrannical, monstrous presence, but also sort of as a victim himself, was a vibe that I was really interested in portraying. It's not so much a part of the story of the movie, but I think comes across in Brandon's performance. There's a degree to which the character feels trapped. So as far as putting the character together goes, um, Brandon, it starts with Brandon, starts and ends with Brandon in some ways, but Brandon Burton, who plays the character, I've been lucky to be his friend for over 10 years.
Wow.
I know he's amazing. Honestly, I think he's one of the actors of his generation. He doesn't like when I say that, but it's really true.
Aw.
Um,
Yeah.
it's amazing. And he just had his Broadway debut, actually. He's
Wow.
incredible. He's one of the, great Shakespeare actors that I've ever seen. And spoilers, but the master of the book speaks in iambic pentameter, speaks in verse. And
Uh,
so as soon as we were writing the story, the script, I realized I'm not an expert in verse. Brandon is. And so we brought him in from the jump and he helped us craft the language.
wow.
But then as far as the design of the character goes, we got to work with Beatrice Sniper, who is, a legend in the indie horror world already because she's so innovative with practical special effects makeup. And we
Mhm.
knew we wanted to go for prosthetics for that character because I really wanted Brandon's face underneath it to drive, that character. And Beatrice, it was a tough job. So Brandon, for one, is a young Black man, and the character is an ancient white man. Um, and so that was a big leap, and that was also, a sort of uh, an ethical challenge in some ways, something we had to discuss in great depth of what it meant for this character to basically be wearing whiteface. And
Right.
so those are conversations that Brandon and I had in great depth. And Beatrice, she started by just taking a life cast of Brandon's face, and then building on top of that. And we talked about, the sort of quality of age, but also the sort of literary text that would be built into his skin. He has, text in his skin and everything. Um, and then we got to work with Alexandra Nyman, who is our costume designer, who took a set of old encyclopedias and built this beautiful regal mantle for the character and heavy, weighty velvet cloaks. And so the character was just this really elaborate conglomeration of all these people's amazing work. Yeah, it's I'm so proud of it.
Really cool. Master of the Books. He's honestly super jovial until all of a sudden he says mark thy name in the creepiest freaking way imaginable. I loved it because it was like we were in this nice fantastical break and then all of a sudden it gets so creepy and then he's a vampire now and it's all making sense after everything that you've
Yeah,
explained to
totally.
me.
What's crazy about
So
that is,
yeah,
just real
yeah.
quick, Brandon, he's the character has these awful, vicious teeth. And we were excited for how that looked, but terrified that that would mean that we'd have to re-record all of Brandon's dialogue.
Mm.
And he's such a technical actor and so proficient in his craft that when the teeth were put in, he was able to talk. He was just like, "Ah, I
Wow.
see. Now I talk like this," and like the voice was just there. And it's just amazing. Like we barely had to replace any of his dialogue. It was awesome.
Wow, that's really hard when you have a different set of teeth, especially when
Oh
they look
yeah.
like
Oh,
that.
I would sound like I had a retainer in. It would be
Yeah,
horrible.
absolutely. You said he just debuted on Broadway.
Yeah.
What play was that?
He was in Death of a Salesman.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah.
Everyone's had to read that before, so we're all familiar.
Exactly. Yes.
That's really cool. Okay, so the ending of the film. I kind of already feel like I know what you're gonna say ish
Sure.
because of everything you've talked about before. Because I was gonna ask, is it happy or bittersweet? And
Mm,
I can tell it's probably gonna be bittersweet there. So we have the shots of the gloomy city.
yeah.
It felt very purposeful. And then we see Mark's in a suit. He looks successful, but not necessarily like happy or
Mm.
himself. And then, he takes the escalator upwards away from the master of the book. So, what is your intention with the ending of the film?
Yeah. Can I ask for you, was it happy or bittersweet?
Well, to me, it was happy at first because I was like, okay, well, like he learned and now he's able to succeed in life. But at the same time, I couldn't help but notice, like, wow, everything's really gray and he doesn't look like himself anymore. And that really sucks.
Yeah. Yeah, totally.
So then I was like, I feel like this is quite the mix of happy and sad.
I
Yeah.
think you may have just answered your own question there. But I think, yes, I think like I said earlier, the movie is a way to ask the question of what success means and what the cost of it is. We're
Okay.
told in this society that we go to college and we're given the keys to success. And I think that a lot of people leave school not feeling like they have the keys to anything except for a pile of student debt. And in the case of a lot of people, that means a sort of indentured servitude to the corporate world. And I think that whatever Mark is doing later in life, I think there's no doubt that, like all of us, he is struggling to reconcile the fact that he has made it out of this difficult situation, but perhaps at the cost of something really significant. And I think CRAM, as a horror movie, offers that the cost might have been something quite deep.
Yeah.
And I think that that's a cost that we all pay in some ways. And, my belief is not that the movie is saying that we all sell our souls to the devil or anything like that. I just think that that's what's at stake. When we are trying to conform everyone into the same mold of student, saying that this one version of success is what applies to everybody, which I should say is a mold that, like, really, I think is designed for the neurotypical, designed for a certain type of person from a certain type of background. This is not a mold that everyone easily fits into. And I think that, Mark, at the end of the day, is, a burnout, is a slacker. He's also just someone who's really lost. And I really wanted to evoke in that sort of final vision that you're describing, this feeling that even once you make it, that feeling of being lost isn't going to go away. Because that's not something that's something deeper, that the gears being ground here are bigger than just school. That's the kind of the best I can say. I will say I really am eager to leave, like I said earlier from Lynch, room to dream for the audience. I think the best thing
Yeah.
about making a dreamy movie is that people can bring their own experiences to it. And I often do think that, like, the more I say, the harder that gets for people. And I'm so grateful that people are able to project onto the movie, because I
Yeah.
think, your experience is as valid as mine. We're not in the same room watching the movie.
Right.
So I think, like, right on, take from it what you will. If it makes you reflect on your own place in life, that's the power of the movie.
Yeah. No, that's good. And also with what you said about, like, he's still lost. That is a really interesting point because a lot of people when they're young always assume that, oh, well, like in a couple years I'm gonna have it all figured out and that stuff. But you could get really old and be like far in your career and you could still feel super lost and not yourself.
Totally.
So yeah.
It's a tiny moment in the movie, but I'm curious if you ever revisit it. The moment where Mark is going up the escalator, I think,
Mhm.
and the master of the books is looking. I do
Yeah.
think that for me, I feel such sadness from the master of the books there. This feeling that, that's an escalator he'll never get to ride. He's an ancient academic demon, whatever he is.
Yeah.
He's been in this library forever. And I think, he made his own sacrifice some point in the distant past, perhaps. And I
Yeah.
think he's still paying the cost of that too.
Would you compare that to maybe someone who's devoted their life to teaching?
Hmm. That's a really powerful question. I love teachers, and a
Mhm.
lot of teachers have changed my life. I think there are, however, teachers who get into it for the wrong reasons. There are teachers who, don't like children. Teachers who
Yeah,
are,
what the hell?
I know, very strange.
Yeah.
Um, there are teachers who I think crave power, and when you're a teacher, it's an easy position of power over people who are very clearly subordinate to you. And I think that the master of the books is in some ways a reflection of, some academics are so in love with knowledge that they forget they also are responsible for people. Um, and I'm sort of interested in reflecting on our educational system as a system that ultimately grinds up people. It's not just about the accumulation of knowledge or education. Um, so I think if anyone devotes themselves to teaching, that's a beautiful thing, to, like, truly teaching. But I
Yeah.
think if someone devotes themselves to academia, that to me reflects
Uh,
something maybe a little more dark.
yeah. like elitist almost. I could definitely see
Yeah,
that.
yeah. I mean, so much learning happens obviously in the classroom, and so much happens outside. And the best teachers I've ever had really encouraged me to learn in the ways that were best for me.
It's great. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, this was so interesting.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Oh my God, of course,
Um,
Riley. Yeah, no problem.
yeah, so plug what you want to plug. I know you said Twitter. I would like to follow you on Twitter, first of all.
Sweet.
Anything else that you want to plug out there?
Yeah, totally. So I don't know when you're gonna air this, but CRAM drops on Friday, March 17th. It'll
Mhm.
be on Tubi. You can rent or buy it on Prime Video, Google Play, YouTube, wherever you rent and buy movies. Um, I'm just so excited for people to finally see this movie. We've worked so hard on it for so long. It's really a real labor of love. Indie films are made by people who are doing it because they're passionate about it. And so everyone who watches the movie, I encourage you to share your perspectives. You can find me on Twitter. My username is at Abie Sidell. So that's ABSIDELL. I have the same handle on Instagram and Letterboxd, where you can leave a review of the movie if you want
Ooh,
to.
okay.
Which power to you. I think yeah, I'm excited for people to have an experience with this thing that we've worked so hard on. And I'm really grateful both to them and to you, Riley, for taking the time to talk to me about
Oh,
it.
well, of course. I am so honored. You have no idea.
Oh, please. Thank you. Cool.
Thank you so much, AB.
Thank you, Riley.
Thank you.
Take
I
care.
hope you have a great day.
Thanks so much.